Hey y'all, it's Sam, and in this video I'm going to show you guys how I painted this painting right here. I'll list all the materials that I used in the description down below. Also, this was done as a live stream paint-along over on Twitch, so if you see things on the screen, that's why. So starting off here, the first thing I'm going to be doing is warming up, so prepping before the actual painting itself. And there's a lot of different things that you can do at this point in time. You can do additional painting studies, you can do time studies, you can do smaller studies, you can do just composition layouts, thumbnails, you can practice the anatomy. So for example, this bird, if you're not super sure how you want to approach drawing this bird, you can take your time before the actual painting process itself and sort of get to know your reference photo or reference photos, get to know your subject, that sort of thing. That's the point of warming up, and definitely something I recommend. It also kind of gets you looser, gets your brain more like into the art mode, starts that flow process, all this sort of stuff. Definitely something I recommend, and definitely something I should do more often myself. So before painting this, I wanted to break down, since I was teaching this on a live stream on Twitch, I wanted to break down the process of drawing this bird into something really, really simple, which is basic shapes. So like a circle for the head, an oval for the body. You can think of a triangle for like the beak or the tail, and just sticks for the legs. You don't have to be more complicated than that. I have a tutorial series on the fundamentals of art, so like line shape sort of thing. I'll link that in the description if you'd like to know a little bit more information there that kind of covers the basics of this sort of topic. Basically break down the subject, break everything down into simple, very, very simple, I'm talking like zero details really, basic shapes, basic lines, and just plan out how you want to approach your piece. Definitely something I highly recommend for any sort of project that you're doing. And also, if I haven't mentioned already, the link to the reference photo is in the description if you'd like to check it out in a larger size and do this project for yourself. So now we're getting into the actual drawing of the bird, and I just want to quickly address a mistake that I made while doing this. Just something to keep in mind for yourself, and also remind myself to keep in mind for the future, which is how I kind of planned this piece out, in which case I sort of didn't. The edge of the painting where the blue line is to have that nice white edge after you remove the tape, I sort of drew the tail right up to that blue tape, and just personal preference. I know it's, not everybody cares about this, but it's something I care about, just how your painting and your subjects in your painting interact with the edges of your painting. I know it's not something that people tend to really think about, especially beginners, but I find things can look a little bit uncomfortable or stilted or awkward just to kind of have them either really, really close to that edge of the painting or to just touch your borders of your painting. I feel like it just doesn't feel right to me. I prefer them to be a little bit more inside the painting. It kind of gives it a little bit more breathing room, a little bit more space, and it doesn't feel like there is a border right here. It kind of removes that feeling of, oh, this is a painting. It's more like, it gives you a little bit more of an illusion of getting lost inside your painting, whereas having that border kind of acknowledged, which it could be a thing you might want to do, but in this case I didn't really want to do that, but kind of acknowledging that border just feels a bit awkward. So either going more inside to give breathing room, or to completely go outside that border and just have the tail go way past that border, I think would have worked better here, but I went right on the edge, so it's a little bit awkward for me. But anyway, so I'm using a regular graphite pencil here. I didn't want to use a water-soluble graphite pencil here because I want to use these lines later, and having a water-soluble graphite pencil will just, they'll melt away with water, which you can use to your advantage if you would like. So even here with this basic shape, circle for the head, oval for the body, like a little egg sort of thing. Really break it down. Don't worry about adding details early on. All those feathers, even the lines on the beak, the eye, don't worry about it so much. You can kind of build yourself up, have that foundation of those basic shapes, that silhouette there first, and then you can start to work in more details afterwards. You'll also notice that in the original reference photo, the bird is, I think, like on a bowl or something. I didn't like that. I didn't want that for my painting, so I changed it into a branch. So don't feel like you need to strictly follow whatever reference photo or reference photos that you're using. Change things up if you want. That's the fun of being an artist. You can make improvements onto the photos that you use as your reference. You can also combine reference photos. Maybe you want some flowers behind this bird, or you want to do something a little bit different with like the colors or the way that it's facing or anything like that. Change it up. do what you want, make it your piece sort of thing. It also doesn't have to be realistic. I went more realistic here, but you could definitely go more cartoony, have some fun with it, make it a little bit more abstract, you know, play around, do whatever style you want. And then before the painting process, I actually used a kneaded eraser, that little gray thing you saw me roll over my graphite. So it's a kneaded eraser. I rolled it out into like a worm or a snake, and then I rolled it over the graphite on my paper. This picks up excess graphite, and then also lightens my lines, so I can still see my line art, but then it doesn't show through as strongly through the watercolor that I'll add later. That's definitely an option. You can definitely have more outlines showing in your watercolor painting. In this particular painting, I did not want that, but I still wanted the graphite there to help guide me paint this bird, so lightened it up with a kneaded eraser, and that's what I got. Also, if this is going too fast for you, I do have the full real-time 3-hour version of this tutorial over on my Patreon page, and I'm now on Ko-fi, which is the same content on both platforms. It's just another option for people who may not want to support on one platform or the other. Now you have an option. So that's over there if you'd like to check that out and follow along real time with me explaining all of this in a much slower pace. Anyway, on to the painting process. All the colors that I used will be mentioned in the description down below, but you don't have to use my exact colors. Whatever colors you have, no matter how limited you have, it still works. You don't have to get everything exact. Just kind of have fun with what you have. That's totally fine. So starting out here, I went ahead and just painted mostly the darker, like blacker spots of the bird and the shadows sections, just to kind of get that down. Watercolor is a transparent medium, so your earlier layers will show through to your later ones, so you can use that to your advantage to kind of build up some depth. It also works as starting light and going to dark, kind of build up those layers that way, and you kind of get a more fuller dark when you have some of the, like an earlier lighter layer down first. It also kind of works as a guide if you're nervous and you're like, I don't know about going dark, it's kind of scary. You can kind of start outlining where you want your darks to go, and then you can fill in your darks that way. I do have a video discussing about going dark if you'd like to check that out. I know it's something that even I still struggle with, but also I know a lot of beginner artists struggle with too. But I'll link to that in the description and also in the card. So now I'm coming back in with a darker layer, just the same colors I was using before. I believe it's a Payne's Gray and ultramarine blue. Those are kind of a common color combo I like to use. Just coming in, re-outlining everything, darkening everything up. And for the feathers, my main tip here is 2 tips, and this works with fur as well, which is basically you want to pay attention to the direction that the feathers are going in, or the fur is going in, and the length that you're working with. So the wing here has those long feathers at the end of the wing under that white stripe. So I want to draw longer lines to kind of show that longer feather part. But the feathers on the head are much, much shorter. So I'm mostly using very, very, very short lines, dashes, dots sort of things. And it's the same with fur. So if you're drawing a short furred area like the snout of a dog's nose, which typically, I guess, depends on the breed. But for a lot of dogs, they have very short hair on the snout of their on their nose. So you'll probably want to almost really not paint the fur at all, or if you do, you can paint short little dots or dashes. But for something more longer fur, you might want longer strokes to kind of show that length and that fullness of that fur. So same thing with feathers, the direction and the length. So the direction, you want to make sure the feathers are going the right way. You don't want the feathers on that wing to suddenly just go up for no reason. That looks a little bit strange or odd. Unless you want to kind of go that way, you can definitely use that to your advantage to be more purposely incorrect. But I think even for more cartoony styles and stuff like that, and especially if you're going realistic, you'll want to have things going in the correct direction. It takes some practice to sort of see these things and to get used to it. So definitely recommend just sort of taking your time, looking at your reference photo, really analyzing what's there, maybe paint over it, draw over it, trace it. Anything that you might feel like you need to do it. Speaking of tracing, I forgot to mention it, but that is also an option if you'd like to jump into a project, barring you have the legal rights to do so. But yeah, you could definitely have traced this bird and then just paint it on from there. Nothing wrong with that. So now I've already painted in the rest of the body. Sorry, I kind of talked over it. But basically you have the gradient on the top of the wing with the more kind of darker blue up until that yellow with a bit of green in between. Again, you don't need all of these colors. You could just go with the primary colors and maybe a gray or a black, and then just painted this entire painting that way. Like I said, don't need my exact colors. Use whatever colors you want, especially if you're struggling with color choices of like, oh, I don't know what colors to mix to get a certain color. Then just limit your color palette. I think it can get really busy and distracting to have so many color options to choose from. You don't really understand what to do with them. You don't understand like, oh, I mixed this red with this green. Why didn't I get this brown? Like what's happening here? So I think taking your time and really limiting your color palette to just like a few colors, and I do mean like a few, like maybe 5 at most starting out, you're going to have a much easier time understanding colors, understanding how things mix together. And once you do start to gradually add more colors if you want to, I found I don't really want to add more colors to my palette. I think I have enough for sure with this particular palette I'm using now. Which I think has like 10 colors in it. But yeah, that's definitely plenty for me. I don't know how some of these beginner palettes can have like 20, 50 colors. Like it's too many. It's too many. I can't do it. But yeah, if you're struggling with picking colors, understanding colors sort of thing, limit your color palette. Less colors. Less is more. Trust me. Makes a huge difference. Same with brushes. If you don't know what brushes to use or what brushes do what or what to do, just limit it to like a simple round brush and just start there. Just go from there. And that's pretty much what I'm doing here. I'm using just a regular round brush. Like I do watercolor painting and I don't know all the fancy names of these brushes. But yeah, I'm just using a regular round brush for this painting. Also, don't forget to paint in the white, so that white of the cheek and a little bit of white stripe, and there's a little bit of lightness to that tail. Don't forget to paint your whites. I know white is kind of, white and black I feel like are pretty tricky, but there is shadow there, there is shade there, so don't forget to add a little bit into that white of the face. I think I used just the regular ultramarine with that Payne's gray. I use that color combination a lot with this painting, just because I tend to like it. But yeah, don't be afraid to take your time, just take a few deep breaths, take a break if you need it. If you find you're really struggling with doing a project and you're like, I can't figure out what's wrong, something feels wrong, just take a break, take like 5-10 minutes, or even like a whole day or a whole week or something. Like you don't need to finish the painting now sort of thing, unless it's like a commission or something, like you got a job to do. Still try and take breaks if you can. But yeah, don't feel like you need to be rushed to complete a project. You can take your time to sort of figure things out as you go. So I'm about to come and make the blues even darker, kind of build up those shadows even more, make them even stronger. I think I could have pushed them more than I did. I think I could have kept going, making it a little bit darker, especially on the wings where the blue and the green sort of gradation, and then the yellow belly. I think I could have gotten that yellow just a little bit more bold, a little bit like darker, more contrasty. I think I could have pushed that just a little bit more. Still, I struggle with going dark sometimes, especially with traditional mediums where there's no takebacks. But there is lift with watercolor, especially when you're using nicer paper. Nicer paper makes such a difference. And also brushes make a difference too. If you're going to use harder, more synthetic brushes, especially those plastic water brushes, you can really kind of almost tear into the paper, really. So just, want to be careful. I would use a test sheet to figure out how you want to do lift. Lift is when you use your brush of only water and you kind of paint over where you've painted on your color on the paper, and you use like a towel or like a tissue or something and pick it up from the paper. You're never going to get back to that white of the paper, but you're going to get a lighter version of what you've painted down, and you're going to pick up some of it. So it can be really useful for various techniques. And yeah, so if you make a mistake and you catch it soon enough, you can use that technique like, oh, I splattered a bit of paint on my paper. You can just put down some water on top of that spot and just pick it up with a tissue. You're good. It's fine. So now we're doing the background, finally. I first put down a layer of water just to kind of get this wet on wet technique going. I want things blurry like the background in the reference photo, so using that wet on wet is really good for that. And here's also where nicer paper is going to come at play, because you're going to be using more layers here, you're going to be using more water here, and you're going to be using quite a bit of paint here. So just having that nicer paper can make quite a bit of difference when it comes to doing something like this. So my main criticism here, well, first I'll mention, that for this background I use all the colors that I used in the bird just to kind of make things cohesive, bring things together, and have things match a little bit more. I didn't want to introduce a new color in the background that wasn't already in the bird because I felt that would be too jarring, and it wouldn't mesh together. That's how I work. That's my mind. But yeah, my main bit of criticism here is kind of how I handled the contrast and a little bit of my fear of getting too close to that bird. So there's just now this like bit of white outline around the bird. Because of that, I think I could have been a little bit more brave, gotten a little bit closer to that bird, and then also went more bold with the background, went a little bit darker with the background, and then matched that boldness in the shadows of the bird, and I think this would have come out much stronger. I did do a practice painting of this piece before I did this live stream, and I went with a lighter background, and I think that worked just fine. But here I was like, I want to try doing a darker background, and that's the benefit of painting multiple times, and you can see them side by side here. And I think if I had just been bolder with the shadows and really went for it, it could have worked as like a good contrast piece of like, here's it with the white background, and here's the same piece but with a darker background. So play around with it. You can definitely do this painting multiple times and just have fun with it, get used to it, just fiddle around, learn some things, all that sort of stuff. Alright, so hopefully you guys found that helpful. Just as a reminder, if you'd like the full real-time 3-hour version where I walk you through everything step by step much more slowly and you can kind of see everything in much more detail, I'll put a link to that in the description down below. If there's any specific videos y'all would like to see from me this year, let me know in the comments down below. And if you give this painting a try, definitely share it with me. I would love to see. And yeah, that's about it. So thanks so much for watching. Bye!